Hi everyone, I'm Catherine, the artist behind Bigelow Fine Arts. How is your coloring going? How did your pile of leaves go and the skull? Today I'm finishing up the American Burying Beetle in Fragile World by Kirby Rosanes. My pencils are ready. Join me and let's color this in together. And finally the beetles themselves. Been waiting for this since the beginning of this page. I'm starting with the black on their outer carapace. The beetles are black with bright orange-red spots. Since their carapace is shiny, I'm careful to leave some really light spots within the black areas, as that is where the light would be reflecting off their carapace. The line art does show this, and I am using the lines to guide where I place these reflections, as well as where I can go darker. I block in the black on all the beetles. Once I have that in place, I come in with the cold gray too and add in a light layer over the areas that are black, even the highlight area. The highlight will not be bright white, but will appear to be because the surrounding areas are so much darker. But they are not white, so I want to block off that highlight with some cold gray to knock back the whiteness of the paper. I also add in a layer of the gray on the legs and the antennae. I can sort out the color on them later, but at least I will have a starting point. They will also show a bit of a highlight as well, so I might as well knock back the paper now and sort out the color later. For beetle number 1, I'm going to work up the bright spots in one push so I can correct any issues on the other beetles. I work up the spots with a light layer of the orange. I put it over the entire spot, keeping my hand light as some of the spot will be part of the reflection, and I want to make sure that shows up brighter than the rest of the spot. After the orange, I use the terracotta to knock down the brightness of the orange. It is rather bright, but mixed with the terracotta, it is a great beginning to these bright spots. I'm avoiding the highlights at this point. I can add more layers later, but it is harder to take away layers, so best to just avoid it for now and see what happens. I look at the line art from the surrounding black area and use that to determine where the highlight passes through the spots. I use the red to bring in a depth to the color, especially where the shadows would be. I use the cream to blend things together and also to add more layers over the highlights and protect them a little more. I touch up a little more with the red and cream to get the colors where I think they need to be. I come in with the cold gray 5 and touch up more areas like the legs and near the highlights. I then use the black to darken up the carapace and the legs, as I only gave them a light layer for blocking in. I wasn't filling anything in earlier, just blocking. Now I am going through and touching up to make sure the orange-red spots are bright enough and the highlights and shadows are in the right spots and look right. And right about here I made the mistake of filling in the top of the antennae. The tops should also be the same orange-red as the spots, so skip filling them in until later. I eventually realized my mistake and erased them back and reworked them in the correct colors. And now that I have one beetle at a point where I think the colors are correct, I can move on to the other two, working them up in a similar fashion. Variation is fine. If one happens to be more red and the other more orange, I'm fine with that. As I noticed from pictures, some did appear to be more red and others more orange. I liked the way the first beetle turned out, other than the antennae, which I didn't notice, so I'm going to work up the other two pretty similarly to the first. I'm blocking in the areas with the orange, again keeping it light. If you look at the highlight areas on the first beetle, it is hard to tell that I even put a layer of orange over the highlight, but I did. Because the surrounding area is so much darker, the light layer looks so much lighter and the orange fades away. But it is there. I toned down the orange with some terracotta, going over most of the areas. I do leave the highlights alone as I don't want them to get too dark. I can fix them later if I need to. I come in with the red, and now I am being really careful to avoid the highlight area. I slow down and make sure I am getting them in the right spot and not putting any red in there. On the wing covers, I do put the red everywhere and make sure there are extra layers in areas where the shadows are, since I'll have to darken up those areas eventually anyways. For the thorax, I think that's what this part behind the head is called, it gets red around the outside part and across the top, but not in the middle. It is hard to tell if that would be hit by the light, but I'm not sure, so I'm leaving it a little bit lighter for now, and I'll see how it looks after. I can always fill it in later. The flying beetle has very little of its spots visible. I add in the red, then touch up the shadows with more terracotta. I come back to the big beetle and work up the spots more. I add more layers around the highlights on the front spot, and it went from barely visible to standing out more, just by adding in another layer to each side of it. I bring in the cream and add a layer over the highlights to fill in the paper and to also protect it a little from accidentally getting filled in. I go through and touch up a few spots with more red and cream and a touch of terracotta. I do need to deal with that thorax spot though, so I come in with the red and I add in a layer over the perimeter of the spot and the sides where it pinches in. I add another light layer over the center part as well. I bring in more orange and terracotta, touching it up with light layers, trying to get it right. It isn't totally working as it is, and I'm not sure why, so I keep touching it up. I bring in some cream and ivory for the center, and that helps blend everything together enough that I'm willing to move on for now. The carapace needs more work now that I have the spot so much darker than the rest of the shell. I begin with more gray 5. I go through and touch everything up. I do put another light layer over the highlight areas, keeping it light. I can now bring in the black and really make it stand out. I begin in the areas where I think shadows would be darkest, and I really lay in some layers. On the legs, I'm putting more layers on the underside of the legs, the part that would be in shadow, and leaving the uppermost part lighter. This does depend on other factors, though. As the legs come in under the body, I make the whole leg darker because it is shadowed by the body. I hit the antennae again and still haven't noticed the tips are red. I also touch up the one in flight, but I still have to deal with the wings. They are a light brownish color, very hard to describe, and I think I did a poor job with them. I gave them a light layer of the brown ochre. I put a light layer of walnut brown on top, and I filled it in with the ivory. I also went back and filled in the highlights with the ivory as well. I was going to call it done there until I noticed the tips of the antennae were the same red as their spots. So I erased the tips as best as I could and came in with the orange first, and then some red to really fill in the area. Then I touched it up with more orange. It is a small area, so it only needs to appear to be close in color. There are some orange parts on their legs as well, but they are so tiny that even if I hadn't already colored them in, I doubt I could have gotten them to stand out anyways. The other thing I noticed as I was looking back at this from a distance is the sky isn't quite right. It was too light near the horizon. I went through and found another darker blue that would work with the phthalo blues I already had down, and I put in a layer under the branch and a little over the top to the right where the branch dips down. I touched up the wings again with more gray 5 and slowly blended the sky up for a smoother gradient. And once I finished touching up the sky, that is it for these beetles. I didn't mean to save the beetles for last, but I hope it was worth the wait. I had a lot of fun with this page and learned about a new insect in the process. I hope you were able to follow along and color with me. I took a really good picture in bright light to show the colors better. Thanks for watching. Let me know below or on social media if you've been following along. I'd love to know how your coloring is going and if you finished this page with me. I'm on MeWe and would love to build a coloring community there with everyone to share art, talk art, and discuss supplies. Patreon has a short write-up as well as all the palettes I am using and a list of the timestamps. It's available for everyone. If you have any questions or page requests, please leave them below or reach out to me on social media. I put in a list of chapter breaks in the show notes as well as a list of equipment I like to use. If you use any of the affiliate links, it really helps me out without costing you a thing. I want to thank you all so much for coming along and joining in with me on this coloring journey. I appreciate all my subscribers and look forward to more of you joining in and coloring along with me. Please like, share, and subscribe to help that happen. Until next time, happy coloring!